The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
The Obama administration wants to expand preschool. States that do would get extra federal money. Meanwhile, a landmark study found that adults who grew up in poverty and attended preschool had better paying jobs, committed fewer crimes, and were more likely to graduate from high school. So, should preschool be a requirement for all children? That's coming up on this edition of The Professors. Joining us today to talk about the benefits of preschool are Katie Gilson, a preschool teacher in the North Lawndale neighborhood, Melissa Scott, a preschool teacher currently pursuing a master's degree in the social sciences at the University of Chicago, Mary Hynes-Berry, a specialist in teacher education, early math, and literacy development at Erickson Institute in Chicago, and Rousemary Vega, a parent and founder of the Badass Moms in Chicago, also known as BAM. Welcome all. Okay. Preschool. We're all chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
Before we start talking about should it be required, I just want to know, what are some of the benefits of sending our children to preschool?
First one is socialization. The original reason for good early childhood programs was to get the children socialized, interacting with each other, learning how to work together in pairs, in groups, which is what eventually leads to good careers and good organizational skills in the real world. You have to work with other people. You don't have to like everybody, but you have to get along.
And anyone else want to add? Any other benefits?
It's really the social emotional growth and development, which is precisely where children are at developmentally. In that 3 to 5, they're just kind of coming out of thinking me, like the toddler, and which is their job description then. And so they're moving into friendship, and nothing matters so much to the 4 and 5-year-old as their friends. And so they've got to learn how to have friends and how to kind of control their other impulse, which is for power. And so is getting that balance between.
You know, I'm going to get you to say that again for a ringtone. Power. Power. Yeah. Okay, so that's the purposes of the preschool, is to socialize, develop those socialization skills, things of that nature. So now we get into this conversation, and we understand, pretty much everyone understands the added benefits, the added values of sending the children to preschool. What are some of the downsides of sending a child to preschool?
Well, there could be many downsides, like if your child is not ready for many reasons, you know, different lifestyles, different neighborhoods.
Now, what do we mean by not ready, though? What is that? What is that?
Well, in many reasons, many ways, your kid is not ready to let go. Like every morning you drop off your child, you have your child crying. These are emotional, you know, detachment from a mother and a child. And when your child is just 3 years old, you know, making something mandatory, it's putting a burden on the child to say, okay, you need to go, you need to stay at preschool. So it's a downfall that hurts both parent and child emotionally. And so I see, you know, sometimes they're not ready, whether they're not ready to speak, you know, because every child has different needs, speeds, and challenges. And not every child would be ready and available to speak and tell you how they feel. Just many reasons.
Right, and that it brings up the important question of wondering what we actually mean when we say preschool. You know, we have these words like preschool, childcare, early child education, and they're all words that are often used with the same kinds of services, but not necessarily. And I think the argument can be made that children should have access to some kind of early childhood service, and there's going to be some kind of service that's appropriate for any child.
Right.
But center-based care, which is what I think you're describing, may not be appropriate for every single child.
I think it's very much an issue of what the preschool looks like, because we have, unfortunately, had such a push towards preschool, where it's not pre at all, it's only school. And the other thing, which is the important thing about early childhood, is that children need to play. and they
let's-
need to interact. And when we take all the social emotional out so that we put the cognitive in, that's not where young children are.
What does the preschool curriculum look like?
That is a very complicated
That's a
question.
very,
Okay.
and it depends on who you're talking to.
Because I think we'll need to address that is as we begin to morph into the conversation about should it be required for all or not. So what does the preschool curriculum look like?
Well, right now in CPS, they pretty much put the creative curriculum on all of us, which was originally basically an idea, a framework of developmentally play-based curriculum. Now we've been handed scripted lessons and scripted the 3-page document on how to read the Three Billy Goats Gruff. That's not where our children are at. It's no longer child-centered. It's standards, and they come in. You can have up to 24 months difference in age in a preschool room.
And you wanted to add?
Just to note that the kind of early childhood terrain is a really diverse place. You have programs that are funded federally, publicly, private, tuition-based, and in each one of these contexts, you have a very different potentially a very different kind of curriculum. So the kind of environment you're describing is the curriculums prescribed by the government to some extent. But in a lot of other contexts, it's different. For instance, I think it's 85% of 3-year-olds are not enrolled in publicly funded preschools.
85%
of 3-year-olds. And 50% of 4-year-olds aren't enrolled in publicly funded preschools. That means they're enrolled in other early childhood contexts that have a whole range of curriculums that don't actually get talked about a lot in a lot of conversations in early childhood.
So what I want to add is, while preschool should be fun and basically a place where it introduces to our child how to become independent, it's becoming more of being held accountable, like something to be expected. Like, for example, I have a son who's in 2nd grade now. He did preschool twice. I enrolled him when he was 3. He missed a lot because he wasn't ready. Physically, emotional, he was not ready to where he would use the bathroom in school. The teacher would call me, I would have to come in. So there's a lot of emotional issues that most times we will ignore because as a single mother or as a working mother or, both parents working in the house, we need these so-called preschools and child care centers available, fully funded for us. So when we say, oh, should it be mandatory? Should preschool look like this? We expect that our kid is going to be playing and our kid is going to be interacting and is going to become an independent thinker, but not pushed to the point where you must and be held accountable to the point where your kid will withdraw, which is what happened to my son, which is why I am against mandatory preschool.
Well, if it's mandatory, it should be mandatory across the socioeconomic band.
Okay.
And I lived in France for a while. In France, beginning at the end of World War II, they made maternelle available to everybody. And the reason they made it available to everybody was if it's only seen for the lower socioeconomic band, then the upper band starts getting real huffy about, oh, we have to help those people. Why are they taking our money to help those people? When it's mandatory for everybody, the government is sending a very strong issue that issues like the socialization, issues like the social emotional life of a child and the physical growth and development, because there are lots of delays. They happen across the socioeconomic spectrum. And it's not helping deficit. It's recognizing that every child has needs. So I think there are 2 things that are in this. One is what's mandatory, and does that mean that we're going to, you and I were talking, Katie, about all the kids in the middle of that band who fall through the cracks because their parents can't afford preschool.
There's many reasons. There's many reasons why we need to look at preschool and it becoming mandatory. We will put burden on a lot of parents that just have different lifestyles, different expectations. And again, we know our children and we know when our children are ready. And making it mandatory, and like you said, every child has needs. Yes, indeed, we all have needs. Every child in the city of Chicago and every other nation city have needs.
Right.
The problem is they're all at different speeds, they all have different challenges, and we have to look at that carefully before we say every child should have mandatory preschool, because every child that receives preschool will have a better career and will make it through college. These are assumptions that we're making based on just wanting to make it mandatory preschool, and we should take into consideration the needs, speeds, and challenges.
And another thing to consider is we don't have mandatory kindergarten.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they go from, we really need to look at it as a whole early childhood package. You can go from a preschool of 20 kids, and at my school this year, kindergarten started out with 55 kids.
How does that conversation go? How does the conversation go that we should mandate preschool, but kindergarten is not required?
Because we don't think. I mean, our policy teachers don't, our policy makers don't think, and they don't understand early childhood, and they don't understand the complexity. You know, the whole idea of the kind of testing that's being pushed is one size fits all. That's nonsense.
Well, let me ask you this, but if we are to require, if preschool is to be required across the board, and there are all these added benefits, but why not then? Why not? I know you're saying that it's an assumption, but why not?
Because,
Okay.
sorry.
Because
Because it goes right back to not giving the parent a decision. It goes right back to skipping over every concern that we have and saying, well, they're already doing kindergarten because we already do kindergarten. I don't know what more mandatory what they wanted, but we send our kids to school at the age of 6, ready to learn and ready to go. And so it goes back to not minding our decision. What are we seeking?
So
what
you
do we
feel like
want?
it takes the control away from the parent?
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think it really depends on what's mandatory. Is going to a place mandatory? Or are they going to tell us that every child has to follow Creative Curriculum Gold or has to take standardized tests? You said 4 times a year? That's
More than 4 times, there's 4 tests.
I believe that early, you know, I really believe, and I did this with my children, and I strongly support this with my grandchildren, that a child's first school experience is pivotal because that sets their attitude
I
towards
agree.
school.
It does. I
And
agree.
so if I had to send my child to the kind of thing that is being mandated in CPS today, or my grandchild, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
Why not?
Exactly.
Because I want my child to play. I want my child to experience their natural joy and capacity as mathematicians, as scientists. I want them to be celebrated for themselves. I don't want them following a curriculum, and above all, I don't want them tested once.
But isn't
Much
that a
less than
gross
4 times a
assumption
year.
to assume that all preschools are bad?
I don't think
she's-
that's what we're
that's what they're
saying. I think
saying.
we're
Okay, so then what are we saying?
I think
first-
that a fundamental tenet to a lot of early child education is this idea of individualizing the curriculum. And we really work hard to find out where children are at, where families are at, and then making sure that the services we're able to provide give those children and their families precisely what they need. What we're seeing in a lot of the publicly funded and federally funded programs nowadays are a one-size-fits-all style of curriculum and assessment.
And
And that's totally
standardization.
inconsistent with this idea of individualizing for children and families.
And the big issue is where's the money? They have decimated the preschool programs in Chicago. We are getting no funding anymore. And not only that, they've taken the enrollment process away from the schools and given it to a central location. Parents can no longer just show up at the school with their preschooler and say, I'm ready to enroll my kid. You have to go through this whole process, and you have to go to another location. Not all our parents have transportation. We have lost kids that have just fallen through the cracks because they can't get into a preschool, they can't find a preschool. Teachers are having trouble keeping their preschools full, not because of lack of children, but because of this process of enrolling.
And also we have a lot of, you know, parents who don't know the knowledge, who don't know where to go, who don't know where to start. Where do we leave these parents at? You know, that just missed the deadline because they didn't know, or because the school didn't send home a notice, or for whatever the disconnection was. You know, so you know, it's a lot of issues, and
I think that that's again goes back to that point that if it's mandatory for everyone, and that means that there's funding for everyone, and that I really think your point about the importance of choice for parents. Children are different, parents are different, and we have a right to send.
I wouldn't use the word choice because we're not actually given a choice. See, what I'm saying is a decision. Having as a parent, being able to make a decision for my children. And when you say if it's mandatory, it will be fully funded, we shouldn't make something mandatory to be fully funded. We should have programs, childcare, preschool, fully funded and ready for these parents who are out there ready. So mandatory, no, absolutely not. Don't make it mandatory, make it available.
Okay,
That's it.
Make it
available.
I think that that's a really good point because again, my children were in a private preschool program, and one of the things, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. One of the things that we noticed about it was this was a Montessori-based program. If the parents were not comfortable with that whole approach, which had kids being very independent, then the child, that was not a good fit for the child.
How do you advise or consult parents on how to choose a preschool?
There's, I mean, there are currently systems in place that schools can choose to participate in, the quality rating improvement system. And centers that choose to participate in that system are awarded stars. And those stars are, many would argue, indicative of the quality of that center. So for many parents, they can use those stars as a way of determining very broadly what kind of experience their child should expect to have in those contexts.
And as a mother,
the weakness to that approach is just that it does strip out kind of that face-to-face interpersonal interaction that a parent might get when they actually walk into a school. The stars tell you actually very little.
nothing.
Right.
As a parent, what I look for in preschool is that teacher, the quality, the love. What's in the class? What is she teaching? Is she going to stand up for my child? Is my child going to be safe?
Are the children in the room happy?
Yes. Are there too many kids in one classroom? I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to look at, go over. And this, again, is why I say mandatory would not work. Because if, as a parent, my daughter, she's going to be 3 this month. She'll be ready. She's fully potty trained.
Right.
I'm still looking because of that fear of who's going to take care of my child. This curriculum, this standardized thing that's, swallowing our schools. I'm afraid that my baby will be burnt out by the time she hits kindergarten.
Do you think that'll happen? The standardization and the testing? Because some arguments are that when we start mandating preschool, what we're actually doing is we're starting to train them into the whole testing culture of education.
Well,
is that true? Do you agree?
I think that at a national policy level, unfortunately, it is. Here's the really interesting thing. There's been enormous study done on brain research and on the development of the early brain. Everything we know from that research is contradicted by what happens in most preschool programs like CPS.
Give me an example.
An example is children should be free to play and explore. They should be allowed to, this whole dramatic play kind of thing is enormously important.
Okay.
Language interaction is enormously important and doubly important when you have second language learners, which are now at about 60% in our urban schools. And what happens instead is kids are being given this curriculum that's taking away from the whole creativity and the language.
Yes.
But some would argue and say, but aren't we just cultivating or helping to encourage discipline?
I don't.
Is it? Some would
don't
say that.
think-
Okay, so what we're doing is we're actually helping to help ensure the children are disciplined scholars. They're learning.
That's a scary word when you're talking about preschoolers.
Why is it scary?
Well, the studies have shown that the preschool boys are actually getting kicked out for their behavior.
Exactly.
And this is who they are. You have to meet the children where they are. And these programs that they're forcing down upon us, you got to accomplish this, 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 and this, and this. Okay, wait a minute. I've got 10 boys in my class. They're all 3. They don't think like that. They don't
That
work like
isn't-
that. They can't sit still. Let's
And
teach them
that's
where they're
actually
at.
an extremely good example of what brain research is showing. So one of the most important sort of brain functions that young children need to develop is called executive function. And that's the ability to kind of control themselves.
Okay.
So if you're not allowed to be a 3-year-old, you're never going to develop that. And that means that you can't be told, sit there in desks doing flashcards when you're 3 and 4.
And I want to add that it is discipline. We are training our kids to be disciplined because my 3-year-old, she's about to be 3 the 26th of this month, and she takes naps. So that's another example of how harshly preschool have come to where we've eliminated.
But some would say for every good example, for every example that you have out there that says, but my kid is I am a good parent. I interact with them. I teach them from home. Someone will also say, well, yeah, for that one kid, I know 3 children. I mean,
that's true.
Who come from a home where there's absolutely no interaction, nothing at all, and then they show up for kindergarten or first grade and they're completely not ready.
Exactly.
But
So how do we answer that?
I think we answer that by giving them the appropriate kind of preschool experience. It really has to do with what's happening in the preschool. So there's something called the million-word gap, which is so many children of poverty come in with very low language development.
Okay.
And if they double their language in preschool, between 3 and 5, your language doubles. So if you come in with 1,000 words, you only leave with 3,000. If you come in as many as children, as particularly at the top of the spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum, come in with 3,000, they leave with 6,000, which is what you need to read. If the child coming in with 1,000 or 2,500 words, or 2,000 words, is not allowed to freely talk, is not allowed to play with other children, that child is not having the teacher talk to them all the time because the teacher is too busy giving them these standardized tests, that child is robbed for life.
And I just have to add, what's the rush? I do understand that there are kindergartens who come in and don't have the necessary language or what they need to be up to date. But it's what I mean. What's the rush? This is what we need: quality, skilled teachers in our classroom, not having kindergartens full of 50 or 40 or more students so that the teacher can say, well, here's Anna who's up here. Let me help Jose a little bit more, because a quality teacher, an experienced teacher knows how to do that and knows how to do it well.
And I think that points to one of the biggest problems we face in early childhood right now, which is just a fundamental mistrust of early childhood educators.
Yes.
I think a lot of these standardized curriculums and assessments and regulations are put in place because we don't trust teachers to do their job well. We think we need to evaluate the environment. We need to stand in the corner and watch them teach and gauge their emotional warmth and put a number on it, because we don't trust teachers to do their job well. And I think the way we go about improving early childhood is not through improving and increasing regulation. It's by focusing our attention on the way in which we prepare teachers to enter these contexts in the first place.
Ideally, how should a preschool teacher be
A
prepared?
long practicum.
Absolutely.
I think that
Very deeply grounded in early childhood. This is what Erickson is actually dedicated to. And our graduates will say this was extraordinarily rigorous, but we see how much we've come through really understanding what a young child is and what's appropriate. In our math program, we've worked with over 300 CPS early childhood teachers, precisely looking at what are the really foundational concepts of math and how should they be taught. And I am so impressed with the quality and passion and dedication of the teachers I see. And I feel and hear all the time how frustrated they are. And I see how grateful they are when we have something like our math program, and they come away saying, thank you.
How long is the practicum? You guys are saying it needs to be a long practicum. What's long?
I think they should have a year.
At least.
What
Year
is it
with
Great
now?
certification.
What is
you
it
know.
now?
Well, it varies.
10 weeks.
It varies tremendously.
Well,
and
State requirement is 10 weeks.
Right.
The state requirement is 10 weeks.
With all the changes that are happening and all these qualified teachers being eliminated and turned around and everything, it seems like, you know, more and more less trained and qualified and experienced teachers are entering our education world, and it's a very scary thought.
Okay. Can you imagine a turnaround of a preschool?
But they've done it.
They've done it.
You know,
I cannot
many of those
imagine.
Chicago public schools had preschools in them.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
And they got
turned them
turned around,
around.
too.
The kids, can you imagine?
And it goes
They don't get
right
it.
back to the expectations they're putting on our 3-year-olds and our 4-year-olds. You know, we're talking about preschoolers, and you're trying to make them compete with, you know, China. Come on, you know, let our kid be kid. Let them be creative. Let them find their characters.
Yeah, but that's what. But some counter arguments are saying, look, we've been doing that, and look at what we've got now.
But
look
we
what we've got
haven't
now.
been.
We haven't
So
been.
we have
haven't
not
been.
been.
We have
should look
cut the funding from what we had 19 years ago to basically nothing in the state-funded program.
So the first time the federal government funded childcare was in World War II. 1943, 1946 Lanham Act. That was the first time the federal government said, we want to create childcare, because they needed women to go to work while men were off fighting the war.
Right.
And since then, funding has been given and taken, each time with a slightly different goal. And so the early childhood landscape is just fractured. And as a result, you have a lot of disjuncture and a lot of confusion. And I think that's one of the things we really need to straighten out.
and
going
actually-
Wait,
forward.
well, hold on. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's continue this conversation online, talking about the disjuncture and the confusion. Exactly how can parents vet a preschool? Because either way, I think some people will say the train is coming. So for those of us who can join us online, you can join us at wycc.org. If not, then we'll see you next time on The Professors.